In the 1950s and 60s, automakers around the world were experimenting with building new designs and made cars to exude opulence and grace. Cars today just aren't the same. Stay tuned and join me for the 15 most impressive cars from the 1950s and 60s. Number 15. 1962 Ferrari 250 GTE Police Car. In 1960s Italy, local police were having a hard time catching criminals when it came to high-speed chases. Their cars simply hadn't caught up with the times, let alone the bad guys. That's why they adopted the Ferrari 250 GTE. It sounds like the plot of a cheesy B-movie, but it's true. So the police bought these fast cars to catch the bad guys. The GTE came with a rebuilt chassis and bodywork and a fresh V12 engine that let it reach a top speed of 120 miles an hour. This automobile became one of Ferrari's top-selling and most beloved models of all time, despite the factory price of over $12,000. And while the design is both sleek and compact, the vinyl interiors also provided a sizable amount of space for the maximum amount of comfort for drivers, both civilian and law enforcement. And it would rip and roar down the streets. More recently, one of the black Italian police models went on sale, and the police lights are still in working order if you want to clear away traffic to hit max speed on the way to the grocery store. Number 14. 1959 Austin Healey 3000. Woo, baby! The Austin Healey 3000 has a name that makes it sound more like a supercomputer than it does a stylish sports car. Introduced in 1959 at the London Motor Show with the famous bulbous design that still manages to be very easy on the eyes, the Austin Healey 3000 was an absolute automotive icon of the swinging 60s. Yeah, this model would make Austin Powers proud. It has a pretty tough-to-beat combination of structural strength and top-notch performance and handling that made it the choice racer for the best drivers of the time, like Pat Moss and David Siegel Morris. They careened through the Alpine Pass at speeds of 75 miles an hour and flew past a lot of the more sophisticated and more expensive sports cars of the time. But part of what made the car so unique was that the manufacturers were able to improve upon the engine while still cutting down on costs, making it faster and still an affordable option for thrill seekers, collectors, and rally racers alike, as it went from 0 to 90 miles an hour in 26 seconds. That's not bad for a car that's as old as your grandparents. Number 13. 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1. Say what you want, but muscle cars will always be cool, and the 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1 is probably the coolest ever made. And who wouldn't want one of these pieces of American muscle sitting in their garage? The Ford Mustang Mach 1 is an amazing blend of dragster and Trans Am that looks like it was built for Steve McQueen himself. The old Mach 1 is built with a water-cooled V8 engine that's busting out 335 horsepower and 440 pound-feet of torque, hitting a top speed of 115 miles an hour. And sure, the car may take a full 5 seconds to hit from 0 to 60, but that just gives bystanders extra time to appreciate such a smooth model. It's just a great-looking vintage car, a great big kiss goodbye to the swinging 60s. And while time may have moved on, we certainly have not, and their 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1 is still one of the greatest vintage cars of all time. If you've got the cash and ever managed to come across one of these bad boys for sale, buy it. Number 12. 1963 Porsche 356. The German car manufacturer Porsche has been providing people with luxury sports cars for almost 100 years, so it should come as no surprise that one of their beautiful vintage models is on this list. The 1964 Porsche 356 may not look as sleek as the Porsche models roaring around the streets today, but back in the swinging 60s, anyone with this car was the talk of the town. This two-door car was small and nimble and handled itself very well on the road because of its light weight. It came with a rear-engine, rear-wheel drive, and was available both in a hardtop and open configuration. The 356 looks like it could be in any old movie full of high-octane car chases from back in the day. It went from 0 to 60 in about 12 seconds, which by today's standards isn't the fastest, but back then it was pretty impressive on the track. But procuring one may be a bit of a challenge. During its production in the 1960s, about 76,000 were made, but the catch is that only about half have survived. This car is a pretty rare find. Number 11. Mercedes 300 SL Gull Wing. Perhaps paving the way for Marty McFly and Doc Brown's time-hopping DeLorean, Mercedes released their 300 SL Gull Wing in 1954. The Gull Wing looks awesome, fit for both a speedster and the driveway at Buckingham Palace, But she's also incredibly important to the automotive world because she's one of the first sports cars of the post-World War II era. And when she first left a showroom in the mid-1950s, she was the fastest production car at the time. The Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing is the first Sportster with direct fuel injection. She could spread her wings and hit 160 like it was nothing. She was as fast as she was gorgeous to look at, and her signature Gullwing doors and plush leather interiors make this vintage car an absolute classic. Over 300,000 of these cars were made, and it's now believed that only a quarter of that number exists today, with many of them belonging to automotive museums. Number 10, 1955 Porsche 550 Spider. It may look like a strange car, but the 1955 Porsche 550 Spider is one of the most celebrated race cars of all time. This thing does look like it's been ripped straight out of an old movie, and is as good looking as some of the movie stars of the day. And although only 90 were ever produced, it quickly sped its way to the top of the class as a mid-engine car with an air-cooled 4-cylinder engine and a superior design that became the gold standard for race cars by the mid-1960s. And while the specs and the body were certainly nice, her track record was even better, dominating the racetrack and typically placing in the top 3 every time she hit the 2-lane blacktop. This Porsche became so popular that even James Dean scored himself one, trading in his older 356 model for the superior 550, and even entered it into a few races. Sadly, this is the car that James Dean died in that same year it was released. Both the actor and the car have left behind a legacy of their own, but combined, the pair was all but unstoppable. Number 9, 1966 Alfa Romeo Spider Dueto. Movie buffs may recognize this entry on the list as the car Dustin Hoffman's character drove in the film The Graduate. And much like the film, the 1966 Alfa Romeo Spider Dueto is regarded as a classic design. And it remained in production for almost 3 decades, with very few changes made over the years. It has since become a bit of a cult favorite when it comes to Italian-made cars, and it's no secret why. The small and sleek Spider Dueto is a 2-seat convertible with an all-alloy twin-cam engine, more accurate steering, responsive brakes, and a finely balanced chassis. This car sold well over 100,000 units in less than 30 years of its run, even though it came with the same price tag as the much faster Jaguar E-Type. Sometimes I guess looks are everything. The more modern design and top-notch specs made it one of the better sports cars to come out of a post-war Italy, and it even earned the nickname the poor man's Ferrari. But that's okay, because I'll gladly take a 66 Spider Dueto any day. Number 8, BMW 507. Despite its hot looks, the BMW 507 almost ruined the automotive manufacturer when it was first released in the summer of 1955. There were some similar cars from their competitors at the time, but the BMW 507 proved itself to be a more economical choice when it came to hot roadsters. At least that's what the German automaker thought. They had originally hoped to sell the 507 for just $5,000, but when the bill came in for production costs and, of course, the cost to ship them overseas to the American market, they went ahead and doubled that figure. So while $10,000 for an awesome-looking BMW may sound like a steal now, no average consumer could afford to pay anything like that. It would come out to just over $100,000 today. The only people buying and driving the 507 were the likes of Elvis Presley, Fred Astaire, and the top Formula One drivers of the day. So in the end, only 252 cars were made, and the endeavor proved to be a financial failure for BMW, and it was dropped entirely by 1960. In fact, the most expensive BMW ever sold is an honor held by their 507, when one model went for over $5 million at auction. Number 7, 1963 Corvette Stingray. There were some pretty serious wait lists to purchase the Corvette Stingray when it burst out onto the scene in 1963. And while many may think of the model as a sports car, it also proves its worth as a touring car as well. Manufactured as a response to the fast and stylish European cars of the day, the Stingray was able to reach a top speed of 118 miles per hour with a 300 brake horsepower engine. It did prove to be the superior model in terms of performance, handling, ride comfort, habitability, and even trunk space for when you want to take a speedy trip. Perhaps one of the few drawbacks of the design, however, is that the trunk is only accessible through the interior of the car, seeing as how the engine and spare tire were both housed in the rear. But sometimes you have to make small sacrifices when you're building one of the most beautiful cars around. And while there was some space for a rear passenger, the Corvette Stingray was best enjoyed with either just one friend riding shotgun or speeding down the highway solo to clear the mind. Number 6. Fiat 8V Ghia Supersonic. The Fiat 8V Ghia Supersonic is a great car that ran from 1954 to 1959 and manages to combine the look and feel of American muscle cars with the royal feeling of an Italian sports car. And while it may have looked like a fancy everyday driver, this was a full-fledged race car. And while its body has a first-place design, it was built with the future in mind. Now, it's important to remember that by the time this car first hit the track, we were still 15 years away from putting a man on the moon, so the Ghia Supersonic almost has a science fiction look to it. It takes much of its two-door design from the high-speed jets of the time, with the front grille looking like a jet intake, with the horizontal line down the sides of the body looking like small wings, and the taillights resembling jet exhausts. Even the interior of the cabin looks like a fighter jet's cockpit. It was post-World War and design was beginning to reflect that. But what really makes the Ghia Supersonic so special and so impressive is that only 15 were ever made, so good luck finding one now. Number 5. 1966 Lamborghini Miura. Miura is a type of Spanish fighting bull, and the 1966 Lamborghini Miura is no different. This thing came with a 430 horsepower V12 engine mounted in the rear and came with a 5-speed transmission. Was it the safest car on the roads? No. But was it one of the most beautiful? Absolutely. The only thing that mattered to the folks at Lamborghini was beating Ferrari in sales and then reputation. And boy, did they ever when they reached the American markets. And while the Miura was developed mainly for the streets, the manufacturers had hoped to see it become a racing car, which unfortunately for Lamborghini never happened. The Miura was both ambitious and exotic in concept. It managed to be practically executed with a minimalist, sharp, and yet sophisticated model that tied all of the moving parts together quite nicely. I love this car. Number 4. 1953 Buick Skylark. 1950s America certainly has a nostalgic feel to it. The youth culture was changing, poodle skirts were in, rock and roll was brand new and blaring at the sock hop, and a decent steak only cost a nickel. And don't forget about those cars. The Buick Skylark is in a class of its own, specifically the 1953 model. For starters, the body of the car was handmade and sat just 5 inches off the ground with open wheels, and overall adopted a more clean and smooth look. And instead of just focusing on speed, the new and improved Skylark had the driver in mind. The interior was incredibly posh, with power windows and brakes and carpeting on the floor. And while the model may have skimped on the air conditioning, every single car was a convertible, meaning you could cool down in the open air. But the inner beauty of the Skylark didn't stop there, oh no, because when you popped the hood, you saw the nail head, the 5-liter V8 engine paired with a 12-volt electrical system, and the first time a Buick even used a V8. This new nail head churned out 180 horsepower. She was fast. This Buick Skylark was such a hit that it was the favorite car of the famous folks of the day, like Bob Hope and Jackie Gleason, who probably blew through red lights and stop signs, driving it like they stole it. Number 3. 1967 Chevrolet Camaro. Most people probably don't know this, but the word Camaro translates to comrade or pal, and so that's exactly how you should feel about the 1967 Chevrolet Camaro. While Ford was absolutely killing it with their Mustang, the team at Chevrolet was cooking up what would become the Mustang's rival for about 2 years. And this car came with a lot more style and a lot more power with its roaring 180 horsepower turbocharged V8 engine that took it from 0 to 60 in less than 8 seconds. The 1967 Chevrolet Camaro came with a front-engine rear-wheel drive and was a 4-passenger sedan with an all-steel integral body with a front subframe. By the time the car was manufactured by the automobile giant, it went for about $3,400, which by today's standards is pretty cheap. Even adjusting for inflation, that's still under 30 grand by today's standards. The Chevy Camaro was turning heads well before it was turning into a robot on the big screen, as the iteration that we know it for today. But plenty of these were manufactured back in the late 1960s and are still in circulation today. Number 2. 1958 Corvette C1. Even though the Corvette wasn't the powerhouse it is today, they managed to change the car in 1958 with their C1 model. It was the fastest car on the street and absolutely dominated the racetracks and finally brought them the respect and the cash that the company deserved. The onset of the C1 was so amazing that Ford had to take a step back to rethink their new Thunderbird. The bar had been set higher than ever before, It had an incredibly cool and luxurious design, but when you took a seat inside, the dashboard was completely dominated by the speedometer that goes up to 160 miles an hour. That's not to mention the gauges monitoring the oil, fuel levels, battery charge, and even the engine temperature that made it feel like you were a race car driver. There was even a grab bar for whoever was riding shotgun when the driver hit the gas good and hard, going from 0 to 60 in under 10 seconds. Number 1. 1969 Dodge Charger. I mean, come on, what else could it have been? The Dodge Charger was designed because a previous iteration needed a serious facelift, but the end product was more than anyone could have bargained for. The Charger's only real competition in 1969 was from Corvette, but the former managed to surpass it in terms of both design and performance. The Dodge Charger had a larger wheelbase and seating capacity and is still able to maintain the sporty and modern look of American muscle. The Charger is simply more aerodynamic and came with an ultra-cool spoiler and truncated rear, and the design approach quickly caught on in the world of race cars. The chassis was able to accommodate both stock and drag tires for a car that was able to go from 0 to 60 in less than 5 seconds. To keep things simple, the car was as fast as a bat out of hell, and it just looked that cool to boot. At the time, it was the epitome of American engineering and ingenuity, and was the perfect car to make everyone behind you eat your dust. Watch our Vehicles playlist for more top 15 videos about amazing vehicles. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best vehicle videos.